The palace torches roared as the chosen soldier was led into Queen Semiramis's chamber. To share her bed was the highest honor, but when dawn broke, the honor became a sentence. Guards seized him, dragging him toward a pit of fire where others had already met their fate. Above the screams and crackle of flames, Semiramis watched without flinching, her jeweled crown glinting in the inferno's light. Passion in her world ended not in love, but in fire. Long before the empires of Rome and Greece, even before the pharaohs of Egypt built their most iconic pyramids, Mesopotamia was the cradle of civilization. And from this cradle emerged the potent, scandalous story of Semiramis, a tale that would echo for millennia. But who was she really? The answer is buried under layers of myth, history, and propaganda. To even start to understand her, we have to turn to ancient Greek historians, men like Ctesias and Diodorus Siculus, who tried to piece together her life centuries after she supposedly reigned. According to their accounts, Semiramis was no ordinary mortal. Her story begins not in a palace, but in the wilderness of ancient Syria. Her mother was said to be Derceto, a goddess with the face of a woman and the body of a fish. In a fit of shame after a goddess cursed her to fall for a mortal man, Derceto abandoned her newborn daughter in the rocky desert and threw herself into a lake, where she was transformed forever. The infant, alone and exposed, should have perished, but legend says the gods had other plans. A flock of doves, sacred birds of the divine feminine, descended upon the child. They sheltered her with their wings and miraculously fed her, stealing milk and cheese from nearby shepherds to keep her alive against all odds. This strange scene was eventually discovered by a man named Semiramis, the chief shepherd for the king's herds. He found the beautiful child, took her home, and raised her as his own, naming her Semiramis. A name some say means dweller in the mountains. She grew up far from court, yet possessed an otherworldly beauty and a sharp intelligence that set her apart. Diodorus Siculus writes that she was a woman of surpassing beauty, a quality that would become both her greatest weapon and the source of her most infamous legends. She was a child of myth, raised by nature, and destined for a life that would reshape the world. Semiramis's life took its first dramatic turn not with a divine sign, but with a marriage proposal. Her stunning beauty caught the eye of Onnes, a general serving the mighty King Ninus, the legendary founder of Nineveh and ruler of the Assyrian Empire. Onnes was completely captivated, married Semiramis, and took her to the capital. In the heart of the empire, Semiramis proved to be more than just a beautiful wife. Her devoted husband found that he prospered in everything so long as he followed her counsel. She had a strategic genius that was just waiting for a chance to shine. That chance came during King Ninus's brutal campaign against the kingdom of Bactria in modern-day Afghanistan. King Ninus had conquered much of Asia with ease, but the walled city of Bactra defied him. Its defenses were formidable, its people resolute. The Assyrian army, General Onnes included, laid siege to the city for months with no progress. The siege was long and bloody, and morale was hitting rock bottom. Frustrated by the stalemate and worried for her husband, Semiramis did something unheard of for a woman of her time. She disguised herself as a soldier, journeyed to the war front, and studied the city's defenses. She noticed that while the main walls were heavily guarded, the citadel, the high, fortified heart of the city, was left relatively exposed because the defenders thought its steep, rocky approach made it impregnable. This was their fatal mistake. Semiramis devised a daring plan. She gathered a small force of elite, mountain-climbing soldiers. Under the cover of a diversionary attack on the main walls, she personally led this unit up the treacherous cliffs to the citadel. When they reached the top, they swarmed the lightly defended fortress, taking the Bactrians completely by surprise. Panic erupted. Seeing the Assyrian standard flying from their own citadel, the defenders believed they were surrounded and surrendered. The unwinnable siege was over in a single, brilliant stroke. King Ninus was stunned. He had won Bactria, but his eyes were now fixed on a much greater prize, the woman who delivered it to him. When King Ninus summoned the architect of his victory, he was met not with a seasoned general, but with Semiramis. He marveled at her courage and strategic mind, but it was her beauty, now framed by the gravity of war, that truly mesmerized him. He became utterly infatuated. Ninus, a man used to taking whatever he wanted, first tried to be diplomatic. He offered General Onnes a staggering trade, his own daughter, the Princess Sosane, in exchange for Semiramis. But Onnes was deeply in love with his wife. He refused. Ninus didn't take no for an answer. His infatuation twisted into a dark obsession, and he gave Onnes a chilling ultimatum. Yield her to me, or I will put out your eyes. Trapped, Onnes was plunged into despair. To refuse meant blindness and ruin. To obey meant losing the woman he loved. Diodorus tells us he fell into a kind of frenzy and madness. Seeing no way out, Onnes took his own life. The path was now clear. With her husband dead, Semiramis was brought before the king. History doesn't record her grief, only the outcome. She married King Ninus and became the Queen of Assyria. She had risen from an abandoned child to a general's wife, and now, through obsession and death, to the throne itself. She learned a brutal lesson in power, that it is taken, not given. After her marriage to King Ninus, Semiramis's position was secure. They had a son, Ninus, an heir to the throne. But Semiramis was never going to stand in a man's shadow. Soon after, King Ninus died. While some accounts say he was wounded in battle, others whisper a darker tale, that Semiramis, having learned all she could about power from him, may have had a hand in his demise. The truth is lost, but the outcome is clear. Semiramis took the throne for herself, becoming the sole ruler of Assyria. And her legendary reign was nothing short of spectacular. For a supposed 42 years, she ruled as an absolute monarch. The Greek historians credited her with incredible feats of engineering, like raising Babylon's immense walls and building a bridge over the mighty Euphrates. Most famously, she was said to have created the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. While history now largely attributes the gardens to a later king, Nebuchadnezzar II, their association with Semiramis shows the epic scale of her reputation. But she wasn't just a builder. The legends paint her as a warrior queen. Not content with the empire Ninus left her, she supposedly donned armor and led armies on ambitious campaigns. Stories claim she conquered lands from Media to Persia and even led a massive, though ultimately unsuccessful, invasion of India, a feat not even Alexander the Great would attempt for centuries. She was a master of logistics, an innovator, and a fearless commander. She had surpassed her husband and built a legendary empire. But when a woman wields such immense power, history often focuses not on her triumphs, but on her scandals. As queen, Semiramis refused to remarry, fearing a husband might try to usurp her power. Instead, according to the legends, she began taking lovers, choosing the most handsome soldiers from her army. This is where the story takes its sinister turn, cementing her reputation as a Black Widow queen. The legend, repeated by ancient writers, claims her passion was a death sentence. To spend a night in the queen's bed was the ultimate honor, but it was also the final one. The men who shared her company were, allegedly, never seen again. So, where does the fire from our title come in? The truth is, the primary ancient sources don't mention it. The historian Diodorus Siculus stated that she had her lovers beheaded. Another historian, Ctesias, claimed she had them buried alive in massive earthen mounds. The fire detail is likely a later embellishment, a product of centuries of retelling where the story grew ever more horrific. The Assyrians were known for brutally punishing their enemies, including with fire, so it's plausible this practice was eventually woven into her legend. One of the most famous stories of her deadly passions comes from Armenian legends, about a king named Ara the Beautiful. Semiramis, obsessed with his good looks, demanded he marry her. Ara, devoted to his own wife, refused. Enraged, Semiramis declared war, marching her army into Armenia but ordering her soldiers to capture Ara alive. In the heat of battle, however, Ara was killed. Distraught and facing a furious Armenian army, Semiramis resorted to deception. She dressed up one of her lovers as Ara and announced she had used her divine powers to bring him back to life, successfully ending the war. These stories of knightly executions, living tombs, and wars fought for lust created the image of a ruler both magnificent and monstrous. But is any of it true? For centuries, Semiramis was considered pure myth. But as archaeologists uncovered the history of ancient Assyria, a real historical figure emerged: Queen Shammuramat. Shammuramat was the real queen of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. She was the wife of King Shammuramat V, and when he died in 811 BCE, their son was still a child. In a highly unusual move for the patriarchal Assyrian society, Shammuramat took control, ruling as regent for about 5 years until her son came of age. And she wasn't just a placeholder. Inscriptions show Shammuramat wielded immense authority. She stabilized the empire after a civil war and is the only Assyrian queen known to have accompanied her son on a military campaign, an unprecedented act. She was, without question, a powerful and exceptional woman. So how did this real, competent queen transform into the mythical, lover-slaying Semiramis? The answer is likely a mix of time, translation, and sexism. The story of a powerful queen ruling like a man must have been shocking to her neighbors and to later cultures like the Greeks. Writers like Herodotus and Ctesias heard these tales and likely embellished them for dramatic effect. It also seems the figure of Semiramis merged with the mythology of one of Mesopotamia's most important deities, the goddess Ishtar. Ishtar was the goddess of love, fertility, and war, a potent and dangerous combination. She was beautiful and seductive, but her love was notoriously fatal for mortals. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero Gilgamesh rejects her by listing all the mortal lovers she's had, each of whom met a tragic end. It's easy to see how the stories of a real queen like Shammuramat could have blended with the myths of a goddess like Ishtar. The real queen's political power became the legend's epic conquests. The goddess's trail of doomed lovers became the queen's habit of executing her partners. The historical Shammuramat broke gender norms. The legendary Semiramis became a symbol of female power taken to its most terrifying conclusion, a way for later, male-dominated societies to warn against a woman holding absolute authority. The end of the legendary Semiramis's reign is as mythical as its beginning. After her supposed decades of rule, her power was challenged by her own son, Ninus, who grew tired of living in his mother's shadow. What happened next depends on which version of the tale you read. Some stories claim Ninus succeeded in his plot and had his mother killed, but a more popular, poetic version claims Semiramis was not defeated. Instead, she chose to abdicate and, in a final act of divine spectacle, transformed into a dove and flew away to live among the gods. This ending cemented her status as a living legend. Whether she died a mortal death or flew away as a goddess, her legacy was indelible. For thousands of years, the name Semiramis became shorthand for any powerful, ruthless, or seductive female ruler. Her story was told and retold by Greeks, Romans, Armenians, and Persians. Dante placed her in the second circle of hell for lust, and she even became associated with the figure of the whore of Babylon from the Book of Revelation, a symbol of ultimate corruption, though this was a much later literary development. So, who was the queen who executed her lovers with fire? The answer is a complex tapestry woven from 3 distinct threads. First, there was the real queen, Shammuramat, a historically verified ruler of Assyria who held power in a way no woman before her had. Second, there was the mythological goddess, Ishtar, whose divine power was linked to love, war, and the tragic fate of her lovers. And third, there was the legend of Semiramis, born from the fusion of the real queen and the mythical goddess, a figure crafted by storytellers who were both fascinated and terrified by the idea of female power. The most shocking stories, the nightly executions, the fire, the tombs of lovers, are almost certainly products of legend. They're the fantasies of a patriarchal world trying to comprehend a woman who shattered every convention of her time. The historical queen likely never killed a single lover, but the legend created around her was so powerful it has echoed through history for nearly 3,000 years. So the question isn't really if Semiramis executed her lovers with fire. The evidence says no. The real question is why this terrifying story was invented and told in the first place. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below.